I remember when I was a high school student and would watch these SAT related videos, they made it seem like getting a 99 percentile score was just the easiest thing in the world to do. Most of these videos would just be like, oh yeah, just do the 8 practice tests online, and once you're done with that, you should be scoring a 1580, right? And I feel like the craziest part about all of that is that these people would actually score a 1580 after doing that. But I did all 8 practice tests and I wasn't scoring near a 1580. So now what? Well, it turns out that for me, scoring above a 1500 was a lot harder than what these videos made it seem. So in today's video, I want to share the secrets for how I, as a pretty average student, went from scoring a 1060 on my PSAT to a 1510 on the official SAT, an almost 450 point increase. So before I continue on with the rest of the video, I do just want to make a note that I'm aware that the SAT has gone through some pretty substantial changes as of recent. But that being said, I want to make it very clear that the tips and advice inside this video are still applicable even to the new digital format. And likewise, doing practice exams from the older version of the exam will still serve as an extremely useful tool for you as you prepare for the new SAT. My goal with this video isn't to give you specific advice on sections of the SAT like the reading or writing section, because you could literally find hundreds of YouTube videos related to this topic. Instead, I hope to reveal the key advice that will literally take you from a below average or average test taker to above a 99.9 percentile test taker. So to start off with just some general advice, I feel like one of my biggest mistakes when preparing for this exam was just starting to prepare way too early. If you're either a freshman or a sophomore, unless you actually plan to take the SAT in either of those years, there's no reason that you should start preparing for the exam. I feel like the time that I spent studying the SAT inside my freshman and sophomore year was literally just wasted time, because I was half-ass studying anyways because I knew I wasn't going to take the exam anytime soon, and I feel like I could have just better used that energy on school or extracurriculars. One thing you can do as a freshman or sophomore though, and I wish someone told me this sooner, is literally just pay attention inside your classes and also start trying to read more high-level books. And this goes in general for when you're preparing for the exam. I feel like you should definitely start increasing your frequency of reading books, because ultimately what it comes down to for the reading section is just reading comprehension. And so the more that you read, the more quickly you're gonna understand difficult text. Another really valuable piece of advice that I wanna pass on to you guys is that for the reading and writing section, you will never have to assume anything. Like, the answer will always be into the text, and you should never be thinking to yourself, well, the text could have meant that, so I'm gonna select that. No, the answer is either inside the text or the answer is wrong. And also, when it comes to how you want to go about answering questions on the exam, find the strategies that you're comfortable with. There are so many conflicting opinions about what works best on the SAT, and what I will say is try a bunch of different strategies and find what works best for you and just stick to it. If you feel like when you're using a strategy, it's taking time away from you actually answering questions on the exam, then I would say probably try a different strategy. An example of a really popular strategy for the math section is that some people like to go straight to the free response questions and then work backward on the math section. But at the same time, others prefer to just work through the section as it's given. And either strategy works, it just depends what you want to do. And the last piece of general advice I have to give is try to stay active during the exam. With this new online format, unfortunately, it might actually be a little more difficult to try to stay active while you're doing the exam, just because you're not able to directly write on what you're reading, but you can still use your mouse cursor to sort of track the text as you read it, and this will just force your mind to stay more focused as you're taking the exam. This sort of practice of kind of tracking while you're reading has actually been shown to increase reading comprehension and also reading speed, so I definitely recommend trying to implement this practice. All right, so now that we got that stuff out of the way, I want to move on to how to actually prepare for this exam. One of the first things you should be doing, and which you can actually do right now, is literally stop the video, whip out a pencil and a paper, and create a study plan. For this study plan, there are a few things which you must have written down. And the first being, you should know when you're actually planning to take your exam. So right now it's the end of July, and let's say you want to take your exam in October. If you're anything like me and far from genius, then I'd say that 3 months is probably the ideal amount of time you want to set aside for preparing for this exam. But obviously, like, this 3-month rule doesn't apply to everyone. Everyone is different. There might be some people who want more time or less time to prepare for the exam, depending on the type of student they are. Once you figured out when you're actually going to take your exam, now you want to dedicate the first 2-ish weeks of your studying to actually filling in gaps in knowledge for the grammar and the math section. I purposely am not mentioning the reading section because I don't feel like there's gaps in knowledge with the reading section. I feel like it just comes with practicing how the SAT delivers the reading section. You can start reviewing material from these 2 sections of the SAT from many online resources like Khan Academy, 1600.io, and also UWorld. Or it may be that once you start reviewing material online, you kind of realize that with these resources, the new material is kind of never ending. And so if you run into this problem, I would suggest investing inside some SAT prep books. I personally decided to go the SAT prep book route, and I bought the SAT College Panda writing and math books, which basically had everything I needed to know related to these 2 sections. I will say that during this kind of like review phase, there will be a lot of content that you already feel really comfortable with, so don't be hesitant to just skip over it and focus on the content that you don't already know. Once you feel comfortable and that you filled in all your gaps in knowledge, it may be surprising to you, but literally all you're going to do now is practice exams. There is nothing else. Like, I mean, nothing else that's gonna be nearly as valuable as taking practice exams. I speak from the experience of someone who went through so much trial and error with this process, and it took me months to realize this simple fact. I hope that for your guys' sake and sanity, you guys do not make the same mistake that I did. Hopefully you guys know this, but College Board offers 8 free official practice exams on their website. 4 of the non-adaptive practice exams and 4 adaptive to the new digital style exams. I would suggest for your first practice exam, you take one of the 4 non-adaptive practice exams and save the adaptive ones for later on inside your studying, just because these will mimic the exam day more accurately. And for your first exam and the following 7 official College Board exams, you're going to want to try to mimic the real exam day as much as possible when you're taking these exams. And I mean following the times for each section, making sure you're taking the appropriate breaks, staying off your phone, and like waking up early, and just like everything that has to do with test day, just mimicking that when you're taking the official practice exams. And after you're done with your first practice exam, what you're going to do next is arguably as important as having taken the actual practice exam. And that is, you're going to deliberately review the questions that you got wrong. And during this process, I want you to really try your best to put your ego aside and identify every single question that you actually got wrong and give yourself the score that you genuinely deserve. Once you've identified all the questions that you got wrong, then there are 3 things that you want to do to deliberately review your incorrect answers. The first being, you want to know why the answer you chose was incorrect, why the correct answer is correct, and thirdly, what about the question tripped you up? Once you're done reviewing your first practice exam, you want to try to keep track of all the questions you got wrong, whether this includes writing down all the questions in a notebook or an online note-taking app like Notion, or if you feel like either of those options are just a complete waste of time, at least keeping a stack of the practice tests that you've already done with the questions that you got wrong on your desk at all times. You might be wondering, what are you supposed to do after you take and review your first practice exam? Well, what you're gonna be doing throughout the weekdays is you're gonna do every single QAS practice test that's available online. I'll put a link to a subreddit that kind of explains more on what QAS practice tests are, and also hopefully a link to download some of these tests. If I'm unable to find the link, I suggest that you guys try to search the internet yourself for a copy of these QAS practice tests, because they're extremely useful and they are official College Board practice tests that just weren't released on the College Board website. So during this time, your study plan should have something laid out to where you're focusing 2 days specifically on the reading and writing sections and 2 days specifically on the math sections, and you just want to try to learn and complete as many of these QAS practice tests as possible. When you're doing these QAS practice test sections, you don't have to mimic testing conditions similar to how you would for the official College Board practice test, but you just want to make sure that when you're doing these sections that you, 1, stay focused, and that you also keep track of how long it takes you to complete each section. And then similar to the process that you would go through when reviewing an official College Board practice test, you want to deliberately review the questions that you got wrong on the QAS practice test and make sure that you're keeping track of them. And my final advice for preparing for this exam is I want you to remember that no mistake is a silly mistake. And what I mean by this is when you make a silly error on a practice exam, this doesn't give you a good reason to just ignore it, because it's likely that whatever small thing tripped you up on this practice exam will likely trip you up again unless you make yourself consciously aware of it. I can recall so many times when I had episodes of dyslexia, but the only times I was actually able to address these episodes is when I actually made a mental note of the error that I was making so that I wouldn't make the specific error again. And that is literally all the advice that you're going to need to absolutely kill this exam. Look, if I was able to do it and score above a 1500, I genuinely believe that any one of you can as well. For anyone really struggling to do well on this exam and frustrated by how easily a good score comes for others, I promise you, you're not alone. I was in your exact position, but listen, I promise you that with consistent and hard work, you will achieve the score that you want. Thank you guys so much for watching till the end. Please feel free to share your SAT success stories with me on Instagram or down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Anyways, until next time, peace!